I spent a lot of time in my newsletter researching and digging into the Chinese OEMs, Chinese automotive manufacturers. It's super interesting stuff. But for all of the things that I know and all of the things that I've learned in the last 9, 10 months putting together the newsletter, I don't think I know as much as Michael Dunne. Michael Dunne of Dunne Insights is probably the foremost expert in Chinese automotive manufacturing in North America. He kind of knows it all. So he knows what's going on. So without a lot of further ado, let's take a listen to how my conversation with Michael Dunne went. Oh, and also, when I entered the podcast, when he and I started recording, he actually started by asking me a question. He wanted to know what was the origin, the genesis of the nickname Growdy. How did I get the nickname Growdy? So I'm going to just drop you right into that conversation. Come at it. Ask the question. What is the question?
All right, first things first. Where'd you get the name Growdy?
I appreciate that you pronounce it correctly. My parents gave me this name, Matthew with one T, and then Growden that looks like Groden. So I'm impossible to find in any directory. Like, unless, thanks to Google and other better search engines, I'm pretty easy to find. But people are like, I can't find your email address. I know I've messaged you before. And they're like, I'm like, because I'm a 1T Matthew. It happened this
Where
morning.
did the other T go? This is getting more mysterious as we go.
Okay. So the genesis of my name, I don't know, why are we talking about this? But the genesis of my name was I am the fourth of 4 kids. And I think by the time I rolled around, they said I wasn't a mistake. I'm still not sure. I can't get, they're not around.
Never know.
Yeah, I don't know the real answer there, but they effectively let my siblings name me. They each got to kind of pick a name, and so that's how my name got put together. And then there was like, and that was because in my family, and if you kind of look at the genealogy of Growdens, there are a lot of Charleses. There are like too many Charleses. My grandfather was Charles Growden. My dad is Joseph Charles. My brother is David Charles. My nephew is James Charles, and he named his son Charles. So there's like, it's everywhere. And even if you took the variation of Growden to Groden, like Charles Grodin, the famous, spelled differently, but I'm sure that was just a crossing the pond problem. Anyway, so they wanted it to be different. They let my siblings name me. They decided they wanted Matthew, but not the biblical version of that. Not that they were like caught, like, they weren't atheists or anything. They, my mother went to church and stuff. So it's a lot of weird decisions that I can't really explain. It was the 70s. That's all I can say.
Names are important. Names are usually, you got them for your whole life. And guess what? We don't have any say in that. It's like, that's crucial, central to my identity.
Existence. Yeah.
And I didn't select it.
I mean, people take that over on their own. They take that responsibility. Yeah. But Growdy was a name that I got early when I started at Google. So almost a decade ago. And at one point I was trying to retrace, like trying to figure out like how long has it actually been. And I went out for coffee with another ex-Googler friend of mine who was at Google in the first year that I was there. And he when I welcomed him, like when we met at the coffee shop, he was like, Growdy. And I was like, oh my God, has it been that long? Like, has it really been almost a decade that people have? So I just at some point I embraced it. I was just like, that.
Is that a thing at Google to give people nicknames, or just you in your case?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's a lot of people get slotted with their last name. I was actually thinking about this in your case, because I feel like you're not a Mike, and you're probably less likely even Michael, that a lot of people are just like Michael Dunne. It's all like both names, all one word.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
You nailed it right there.
But, and in our office, in the Toronto Google office, there were so many Matthews. Most of the Matthews, regardless of 1 or 2 T's, all went by a variation of their last name. So Growdy gave me, a different name within the organization, and all of the other Matthews and all of the other Michaels were predominantly identified by their last name to try and disambiguate You got to figure out. I actually created a internal Google group at one point just called Welcome Matt to add all of the Matts to, so that we could kind of exchange when someone emailed the wrong one of us. Like, I got this email. Do you know who it's for? Yeah. But thank you for being here. Welcome. That was a lot of name preamble I wasn't expecting, but I appreciate it. Where do you want to begin? I heard from trusted friends and colleagues that you were here in Canada back in February at the CADA event and that you crushed it. Like the resounding response was that you did an incredible job and you shared a lot of information that many of my OEM friends here in Canada in automotive didn't know or maybe still don't know. But
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. There is a big story to tell, and what makes it really fascinating is that to a large extent, Americans and Canadians have not yet gotten the memo. And what I mean by that is there's been an earthquake, a transformation in the global auto industry. China is now the center, whether we like it or not, whether we're ready to accept it or not, by every measure. Capacity. They have capacity to supply half the world's demand. They produce twice, 3 times as much as the United States. They export more than anyone else in the world. They build more EVs than all other countries combined. The battery supply chain totally dominated by China. And yet here we sit in North America, in Canada and the United States and think, what are you talking about? I don't see any Chinese cars around here. You got to be kidding me. This is a classic case. Must be The Boy Who Cried Wolf. This is Much Ado About Nothing. I haven't seen any Chinese brands in Toronto, Montreal. No. So, but the reality is we're on an island here. And if you go to Europe or Southeast Asia, or Latin America, you're going to see a surprising number of Chinese cars, more every month. It's time. I think the message back in February was, this is real. It's now, and it's bigger and more powerful than anything we've seen come before, including competition from Japan and Korea in the past. So when you have a story like that to tell, it gets a lot easier to connect with your audience.
Fair enough. I mean, I want to get into all of that, but I also want to start at the beginning. I've done my research. I've done my research on you, or at least I've listened to other podcasts you've done. And so you were born and raised in Motown. You're a Detroit boy. Is that true? Is this true?
Absolutely true. Grew up, you've heard of 8 Mile, right?
Of course.
8 Mile is nothing compared to 5 Mile. That's where I grew up. 5 Mile in Finkel. Tough neighborhood growing up. But I'm from Detroit. And most importantly, one of 7 kids' fathers, Jim Dunne, the legendary car spy. So one of my first jobs as a teenager was to drive the getaway car. What we do is we'd go out to Milford, Michigan, if you've been there at the GM Proving Grounds, or Oakwood Boulevard, Ford Motor Company. Chrysler had secretive car development areas in and around Detroit. We'd go there and hunt. I'd drive the car. He'd have his long-lens Nikon camera out the passenger side, and he'd direct me. Let's go shoot down. Oh, geez, there's one. And you'd see it in camouflage. We'd often pull over. He'd chase the car. As you can imagine, how do you take a spy photo of a car that's out in the wild? And so he'd set it up that we'd drive at a red light or a stop sign ahead of the car. He'd jump out with his camera and be all over, do a walk around, get back in the car, light turns green, we're off. And you look back and the person behind us like, what just hit me? So those were my formative years, being around my father, Jim Dunne, a larger-than-life figure, fearless, and he became known as the car spy. So I knew cars, and Detroit wasn't big enough for 2 of us growing up. So early on, I understood that I'd have to make my own way, and it would be somewhere other than the middle of America.
Right.
Yeah.
So where did you end up? Where are you now? Where's Dunne Insights based?
Dunne Insights is based in San Diego, California. I've been here now 8 years. So I went to Michigan, did a degree in an MBA there and a master's in Chinese history and language. Straight out of school, went to Asia. And for the next 26 years, lived in China, Thailand and Indonesia, always related to the auto industry, doing startups, running General Motors, ran JD Power for a while in China. Then 7, 8 years ago, drawn by Google, the Waymo program, and Tesla, I said, I feel like the next big thing is electric and autonomous vehicles. So I wanted to come back here with my knowledge of Asian markets and bring it back to the United States. Yeah.
Or you just wanted better weather than Michigan.
Better weather, better air, better, sunshine, everything on the West Coast. Phenomenal.
I do love Detroit. So I obviously, working in the automotive ad sales team at Google, I've spent a lot of time in the Detroit office, and I do love that town. Did you get to drive any of those iconic vehicles? What was the best ride you managed to get or sneak in while kind of riding shotgun with your dad?
I like the Porsche 911. That's the enduring memory. Just that car, the stance in the driveway, getting into the car and moving out. Like, that was amazing, especially as a teenager. We had BMWs and Mercedes and even Ferraris, Cadillacs, Lexus, all the sweet cars to drive. But Porsche was it for me.
Was it?
Yeah.
Fair enough. But I feel a little bit like you and I, because I talk about a lot of the same things. I use your insights. So thank you for the awesome tweeting. Thank you for the awesome newsletter. A little bit like I'm shouting in the dark here in Canada or in North America. What do we not know? Or maybe even what has changed in the months since February that the industry is not paying attention to in China?
First off, I really wanted to say, coming into this, I saw the name of your podcast, The Change Optimist, and I was thinking about it for our conversation today, because as a Westerner, as a Western manufacturer and a supplier, it's hard to feel optimistic about the changes underway right now. We are feeling like we're back on our heels. We're retreating from markets globally. We're sort of, shrinking into North America. So what's changed since February? I think the most significant change is that China continues to ramp up its exports into markets globally, including right on our doorstep here, Mexico. I don't know how many people are aware, but China is now the number one supplier of vehicles to the Mexican market. I was there just a couple months ago, astonished when you arrive in Mexico City. You see billboards for all kinds of Chinese brands. They're there on the ground. And then in that particular week, BYD launched a massive product event around their brand new pickup truck called the Shark. It's a Toyota Tacoma, or a Ford Ranger Fighter. Terrific looking vehicle, really well designed, all electric and PHEV. This one's going to be a PHEV. And you look around and you go, wow, they're serious about going global. Just to stay on that point, another change is not only are they exporting from China, but in the case of BYD, they are now building plants in, get this, Brazil, Hungary, Thailand. They just announced $1 billion investment in Turkey. And there's likelihood that after the election, they'll decide on Mexico. So the biggest change is that China's no longer staying home. They're on the offensive globally, and it's catching traditional powerful global automakers by surprise. This week, what did we learn? Volkswagen CFO came out and said, oh, by the way, we have 500,000 cars without a market. The market's not there. We've got factories for, what are we going to do? Volkswagen's never seen this kind of crisis before, and it's all because the Chinese have become so much more competitive.
I saw the promo video for the Shark, and my first thought, again, coming at this a little bit from the advertising, marketing, media side of things, I'm like, they need to hire a better agency. This video is weird. I mean, the truck looks great. I think they've done an incredible job, and it's a PHEV, correct, as well?
Yes, it's a PHEV. That's right.
So like they're hitting a lot of chords with that vehicle. They're striking a lot of high notes, but I was like, there's something weird about the way they staged this creative. But my God,
Quirky for sure. I do remember them rolling out the pickup truck on a big stage. There's over 1,000 people, media from all over Central South America, and there's a shark on top of the cab. Like, okay, the name already is enough. It's a little bit to get used to. Get it? It's tough. It's dangerous. It's strong. But that shark, like big, huge, overstuffed doll on top of the cab, I don't know. Maybe they would do it.
Well, they jumped the shark before they got into season one. They jumped the shark right away. So so you touched on Mexico, and I reached out to an industry contact of mine as well. I said to him, I'm going to be talking with Michael Dunne. He was at that CADA event. And so one of the things he asked, he said, knowing how aggressive the Chinese OEMs and specifically BYD are being with their global automotive expansion, where does that put Canada? Like if Mexico is, stage one, ground zero, whatever, scary analogy you want to wrap around it for Chinese OEMs in North America, what do you think about the prospect of them eventually? I know we just dropped 100% tariffs on Chinese-made EVs and a bunch of other things, 25% on steel. But does that dissuade them? And isn't the opportunity for them to land and start manufacturing within the bounds of the EU and the USMCA so that they can mitigate or offset those tariffs and sell vehicles that are produced effectively domestically?
Yeah, their first best option, their comfort zone, is to stay at home and export because, of course, they have the infrastructure, the supply chain, the subsidies, the language, the regulators, everything works in their favors at home. When they confront 100% tariffs here in the United States and Canada, they quickly realize, we got to go to plan B. Let's think about transplants, as the Japanese and Koreans have done before. So that would be the natural next step. What will be interesting to watch is how successful will they be in creating the same cost structures when they're not producing at home. That's an unknown. That's a big question mark out there. As for, if we look at this on the other hand, that's a Chinese perspective. From a Canadian perspective, two things going on. One, the tariffs do buy important time. Elon Musk is on record saying without the tariffs, the Chinese would roll in and basically demolish most manufacturers in the world. Those were his words. I take them seriously. So we've got the tariffs up. Now, part B is we have to rally, hustle, work hard to build our own batteries, battery supply chains, mineral processing, most of which is just non-existent today. Now, having said that, just 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to fly into London, Ontario, and over a massive plot of land, I looked out and I asked the pilot, what is that? And he said, that's Volkswagen's huge investment here. So Canada's job now is to accelerate the pace with which we build batteries and battery supply chains at home. And it takes time. This is the hard part. It probably take 5 to 7 years to get to a level where we're competitive globally. And we in the West aren't patient. We're like, why would we do that for 5 years? Let's just let the Chinese come in and buy their cars. Yeah.
Well, and that's
the tension.
Right. I mean, it's a battle for land. Like, it feels like the Chinese approach is tactical to the point of being like military strategy. And it also feels like, collectively, Canada, US, every other manufacturer outside of China has been caught flat-footed, like caught on their heels a bit. And so what accounts for that? Like, why didn't we know? Like, why didn't we move faster? Like, sure. And so talk a little about maybe the why we didn't know or why we weren't paying attention. And also talk about, in your opinion, do the tariffs, Canada, US, EU, elsewhere, Britain being the weird outlier with no tariffs, do they slow it down enough to buy enough time for the likes of a Ford, a GM, and a Volkswagen to actually make headway on this?
All right, let's take the first part of your question, because I think that's really a delicious one. How in the hell did we get so blindsided? What happened? Were we just totally asleep at the wheel? After all, people running those businesses inside China for the global automakers, they weren't dummies. They were they're in the market. We'd had decades of experience selling to the Chinese consumer. they weren't totally asleep, but let me just paint the picture, having lived there, of how it sort of evolved. And then maybe we can begin to understand how the abruptness of change really caught everybody by surprise. So if we go back a little bit, bear with me, a little bit of history. China, way back in the 80s, when I first went there, 86, they put in place this policy and said, we have a zero auto industry here. We don't even know how to make cars. So what we're going to do, we're going to invite the global automakers in, form joint ventures. They will manufacture here, but in the joint ventures, we, the Chinese, will hold 50% ownership. And global automakers said, oh, that's the cost of market access. Okay, don't like it, but that's market access. That's the tax we pay. And the Chinese ambition was, great, we're going to have them invest, teach us how to make cars, and within a few years, maybe a decade, we'll learn it and be off and running with our own brands, just like the Japanese and Koreans did. Okay, there's proof of concept, there's precedent for it, all the rest. Well, what happened in actuality is that the Chinese joint ventures were wildly successful through the 90s and 2000s, selling millions of cars to Chinese consumers, but they were almost all global brands. Your Hyundais and Buicks and Toyotas and Mercedes and BMWs selling like crazy. And the joint venture partners were looking around going, this is great. We don't even actually have to invest in R&D, engineering, don't have to take any product risk. We just import these global brands, manufacture them here, sell, and take half the profits. So they were happy as Chinese companies, as joint ventures, everybody's sort of making money. In the words of the CEO at GM, I remember in about 2006, told me, we're making more money than God here. And so is our Chinese partners. So this can run forever. Got it? You with me?
I'm with you. I'm with
you.
Yeah.
Roll up to 2000. I'm going through the history as quickly as I can. 2010 was an important year. 2010, China surpasses the United States for the first time in terms of market size and production. And the ministers, I remember being at a symposium in downtown Beijing, and the Minister of Industry said, great, we're number one in production, number one in sales, but I'm so frustrated because I step outside the door and I don't see any Chinese cars on our streets here. This is not right and not acceptable, but how can we change it? We, Chinese car companies, we're not catching up with the West. We need to change the game. So beginning in 2010, and more importantly, 2014, with a master plan called Made in China 2025, China says the only way we're going to compete with the West is to change the game and pivot to electrics. So what happened? Starting in 2010, 2012, 14, 16, 18, central government's like, we're going electric. We're investing in batteries, charging infrastructure, incentives for the consumer, we're going electric. We're going electric. And what did the Chinese consumer say? No, sir. We still like our gas-powered vehicles from Hyundai and Honda and Toyota and Buick. We're staying with the course. And so through 2020, up until about 2020, global brands still totally dominated the market landscape there. And so you could see, if you're an executive from a global brand operating in China, you go, well, let's see, the 80s, they liked our car, 90s, they liked our cars, 2000s, 2010s. We're on a 35-year run. Why would that change? Okay, we have to go to a commercial break because I can't remember exactly what. So what happened? What happened in 2020?
It's a lot.
What happened in 2020? It's all kind of a convergence of different elements, but in my mind, one man's perspective is what changes up until 2020. And I talked to executives from the Chinese automakers, even in 2018, 2019. BYD sales, now a powerhouse automakers, they were declining year on year. I talked to the OEM CEOs of the Chinese leading OEMs. I said, electrics, future. No, this is 2018, 2019. Not happening. We don't make money on it. Our partner doesn't like it. Consumer does. No. Then we enter COVID. And by the way, Tesla starts to manufacture cars in the first quarter of 2020. And in my mind, that was a monumental change. They start producing the Model 3. And suddenly the Chinese consumer goes, wow, electric cars can be cool and reliable and fast and up to date and have the digital interface and the software. Whoa, this is phenomenal. I want some of these. And so Tesla began manufacturing the Model 3. They sold way beyond their expectations. And this had a massive halo effect on all other electric cars being offered in the market. Yeah. And then we went into COVID, and most people from the West didn't visit China in 2020, 21, 22, 23 until the auto show last year. And my good friend Klaus Meyer, who's former CEO at Mercedes China during the golden years, he was at the show. He called me here and he said, Michael, it's a shock. Forever, global brands have dominated. That is over. The Chinese are in charge, and the days of the global automakers are numbered.
Wow.
That was just a year ago. I got this call from him. I said, what, Klaus, where are you? Yeah, I'm standing in the middle of the auto show here. You cannot believe it. That was in Shanghai.
In Shanghai.
Yeah, they alternate every year. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Shanghai 23.
Wow.
Yeah. So what happened in that, like, one was this Tesla effect. The other one was all this 10 years of investment in batteries and infrastructure start to pay off. And then the third one is, to their credit, the Chinese tech billionaires founded really cool companies like NIO and Li Auto and Xpeng and others, and infused China's auto industry with some really great software. So they all of a sudden, oh God, they have the batteries, they have the software, they have the scale, and electrics are cool. And oh, by the way, electrics in the largest market in the world are cool. Now you have scale, you have leverage, momentum, and it all starts building. And you go to the GM headquarters there, or Volkswagen, who had been a powerhouse there, making billions. And they're like, what has happened? Our markets are vanishing. Our sales are collapsing. Our profits are going, no one wants our cars anymore. This is where we are today, kind of a, lulled into a sense of complacency of forever making big bucks in China to, whoa, we just got whooped upside the head and we're not sure exactly what to do next. They had not prepared for this electric revolution.
Right.
And now they're racing, they're scrambling to try to catch up.
Well, and so this is many thoughts. I have many thoughts, but there are, I think you have a really interesting perspective and probably have access to some relatively concrete data on this. This notion that, and I love the vernacular, right? Because the media is generally talked about in the last 7, 8, 9, 10 months about the slowing of EV sales, right? The slowdown of EV sales. And I think that, in my opinion, that's true if you're Tesla. They seem to be struggling for the first time. This is the first time they've struggled, but they also have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of pre-orders for Cybertruck they haven't fulfilled yet. So struggling is a relative term. How real is that from your perspective in terms of, what does slow down really mean? And the other parallel narrative of what people really want is PHEVs, plug-in hybrids, and how do we learn, or what can we learn from the Chinese experience there, if they are, by your account, almost a decade ahead of us on that particular curve?
Mm-hmm. First off, with regards to the slowdown, China's just seen an explosion, acceleration. So the most recent numbers you've seen in July, August, EVs and PHEVs now account for more than half of sales in the largest market in the world. By comparison, North America, we're at 8, 9%, maybe 10%. Europe's high teens, but China's just exploding. So, and then that has important implications for us in North America, because up until very recently, we sort of were the global trendsetter in terms of product, in terms of powertrain. What happens if this country over there, the largest market in the world, is building EVs, and that's the future trend? What now we're on the we're reacting, we're not leading. So that's one. The second one, and you mentioned PHEVs a couple times. It's not all pure EVs in China. In fact, BYD, the market leader there, the majority, 60% of their sales this year are PHEVs. So we are seeing a trend that began maybe a year ago across the world where, initially everyone ran into BEVs and then they realized, oh, there's shortcomings, charging time, infrastructure, all the rest. Let's pivot. There seems to be a big pivot to, hey, PHEVs are like a diet BEV. Oh, yeah. If you ask your average consumer, I've talked to many dealers, I go, when a consumer comes in and asks for a PHEV, do they know what they're asking for? And the dealers go, no, of course they don't. Because very few people do. What is it? What the hell is a PHEV? But they know it's something like a pure electric, and it's better than a gas. So we are seeing a lot of consumers across the world go to PHEVs, mainly because it alleviates this whole thing called range anxiety. Don't worry about that, as you did before. That's sort of the trend. Now, what does it mean for people in Canada? I think the Canadian market, with your long distances and your cold weather, is a natural for PHEVs, and then the BEVs, the pure electrics, are going to be more naturally in city centers like Vancouver and Montreal and some parts of maybe Toronto, but they're more specialized niche market for commuters, and then PHEVs for the rest of the country.
Yeah. I mean, I think I talk about it. I mean, I drive not a plug-in hybrid, I drive a hybrid. And fundamentally, the reason for that is because in a weekend, I'll drive, 1,000 kilometers.
1,000?
Yeah. It happens.
Crisscross Europe a couple times then.
Well, sorry, not 1,000. Well, we'll drive upwards of 1,000 kilometers. We have
Wow.
we have a cottage. We have a property that's like about 300 kilometers north of the city. And if we come back down to visit family, it's almost 100 kilometers south to visit. So
give us some names. What's that location 300 kilometers north?
So we're in Tobermory. We're up in Tobermory, which is, I stare, I guess, when I look at the lake, I look across at Alpena. So I'm staring across at Michigan. And so Toronto to Tobermory is just shy of 300 kilometers. If I go in, because our place is just off the highway, if I go into Tobermory and back, that's a 30-kilometer round trip. If I go to visit my in-laws in Wyerton, that's nearly a 200-kilometer round trip. So if we go to Tobermory, if we go to the cottage, go to Tobermory, drive down to Wyerton, drive back, swing over to my sister in Kitchener-Waterloo on the way back home, we'll easily drive 1,100 kilometers.
1,100. All right. So you have to be truthful about this. How do you charge at all during those?
Well, so no, we're not a PHEV. We're just
you're hybrid.
Yeah, we're just hybrid.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So but we've talked about, my wife, is very interested in electric vehicles, as am I. I am eager for either, a variation or the BYD 2,000 kilometer range hybrid, because I'm like, that is perfect for me and my driving needs. Or I want someone to start buying the CATL 1,000 kilometer battery. Like I don't know if it's the C5 or C4 or whatever it is, but I know that those things exist. I just know they're not here, and no North American, Japanese, or European manufacturers putting them in vehicles. So I want that, but I also think that that's, whenever I mention that to people, no one knows that exists. Everyone is still very much afraid of this whole quote unquote range anxiety problem, yes, which it seems, and you tell me your opinion, tell me what you think about this, is going to evaporate in about 5 years. Like within 5 years, where those batteries exist today, they're going to start showing up in vehicle production plans. By the time they start getting built, there will be even better batteries. And that by, give it 5-10 years max, this whole range anxiety question, yes, there's still charging problems, but I think if the batteries last longer, that's half the battle, is it not?
Yes, absolutely. Everything's going to get better. The batteries will have longer range, and the infrastructure for charging will definitely improve. Now, full disclosure or full transparency, just compare and contrast my own experience. I have a Model S in the driveway, also a Jeep Grand Cherokee. And I've been driving Teslas now for 8 years. Still, it's true. Tesla has phenomenal charging infrastructure. The range is great, over 300 miles. And yet, it is an adjustment for sure. When I get in my Tesla, my eyes keep checking that charge. How much range, how many more miles, or what percentage battery? Much more so than when I'm driving the Grand Cherokee. Grand Cherokee, I don't look at it. And once in a while, I'll go, oh, ding, it's down to a quarter tank. I know a gas station's around and it'll be done. And so there's total peace of mind in the one vehicle. And still, even after years of, you still are kind of, I hope everything's okay with this battery, because if the battery goes and the charging is not close by, there's no plan. And that happened to me one time. One time I took my sons to a baseball tournament in Arizona. You learn a lot too, driving a pure electric vehicle that you didn't realize. So one of the things was, we arrived at the park and I checked, I had about 25 miles of range. Oh, from the park to our hotel is 10 miles. I'm good. Now it was 110 degrees in Arizona. Parked the car for 6 hours. The car has to keep the battery cooled, which requires energy. I didn't know that. I should have known that. I didn't know that. So I get into the car after the double header. It's noon. It's so hot out. I step in, and as you know, with a Tesla, there's no key. You just touch the brake and it turns on. And I look and I see 2 miles.
Oh my God.
2 miles of range. So my boys are in the back seat. I said, boys, bad news. We got 2 miles of range. The hotel said, what did they do? They bolted. They're like, hey, they're looking for their friends. Give me a ride. My dad's stranded. We need to get back to the hotel. So, but I called Tesla and I said, what do? I didn't expect this, that the car had drawn energy from the battery to keep the battery cool. I'm at 2 miles. And they said, start driving, get as far as you can. And then if you can't make it, we'll send a tow truck up to get you.
Right. Well, that's their own roadside assistance. Wouldn't AAA have done the same?
Like their own, AAA would have probably done the same. Now, here's another little tip. I crept along very gingerly toward the nearest charging center and somehow made it. So when it does say 0, you probably still have about 10 miles left. But it is definitely anxiety making, because you just realize there's no easy fixes if that battery is out.
Right.
And that's why, as you mentioned, hybrid or PHEV for now, great solution. Yeah, it just takes that out of the equation. You don't have to worry about all that.
Well, what's the other, and I don't know the acronym, I'm sure I could have Googled it, but the EV with range extender.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So basically a single stroke or 2-stroke powered generator with a gas tank attached to your EV in some fashion. I know that was a big selling point for the Ram Revolution. They're kind of one of the first to actually talk about that. But I've heard Jim Farley talk about that, the CEO of Ford, about that there's also a market for that, especially in places where, in a plausible future, if you lived in rural, Canada, US, elsewhere, and you could only buy electric vehicles, hypothetically, then with a range extender, you're still like sucking down some sort of gas and still generating some sort of electricity. Yeah.
So I try to sort it out in my own mind. So here's how so PHEV, what do we have? We have a battery with an engine too. So when the battery goes down, you can go to the gasoline powered engine. With the extended range EREV, extended range electric vehicle, you basically have a bigger battery, and that generator on board tops up the battery as you go. So it's closer to a pure electric, but you still kind of eliminate the range anxiety because of you have that generator, you have that charger on board basically. So this is done really well with a company called Li Auto out of China. They're the leaders in EREVs in China. And then when Farley went, I know he test drove one of those vehicles. It's a big vehicle. And he said, this is going to be perfect for our larger SUVs and trucks. So
Nice.
it's good news for us as consumers. We have hybrid, plug-in hybrid, e-revs, or battery electric,
Got it.
depending on your driving behavior.
Now, the trope I see, I post different articles that I find, or whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter, or even just sharing articles, newsletters that you've written, I see this commented coming, maybe your JD Power experience helps with this particular question. But the question people jump to very quickly, right, is quality. That even if they can kind of wrap their head around everything else, they're like, isn't this basically the Hyundai Pony of vehicles by the time it gets here? I even
Yeah.
have my neighbor just around the corner. I don't know who they are, but when I walk my dog, I see this Model 3 parked in an alleyway around the corner from my house, and the license plate, I laugh every time. The custom license plate is panel gap.
Ah.
Right. So, and all the gearheads, my brother-in-law is big gearhead, motorhead. He loves his Porsche as well. They talk about the build, quote unquote, build quality is shit. Do you think that's true at this point? I feel like maybe that might have been true pre 2020, but that through the combination of joint venture and now decades of manufacture, they've almost got this under wraps. What is your opinion on that? How ready would these vehicles actually be for the North American market if they could sell them here?
We're talking Chinese vehicles,
Chinese
like
vehicles.
BYD and
Yeah.
their quality is there. I was recently on a test drive with dealer groups from the United States. It was a private affair, just a handful of people. And afterwards, I asked them, how would you rate these Chinese cars versus the best of Hyundai today? If Hyundai's a 10 out of 10 today in terms of quality and value for money. And these are test drives for a day, but they said 9.5 right there. They were stunned by the fit, the finish, the ride quality, the quiet, the smoothness. They said that they were blown away. So how did that happen? Well, for so many years, the global joint ventures not only went there to assemble vehicles, but they brought all their world-class suppliers in too. So your Bosches and Magnas and Lears and Aptives and Valeo, they all have dozens and dozens of factories in China. So the Chinese automakers can just go to them and say, give us your best seats, give us your best instrument panels, just like you make for BMW or whomever. So that's been a big leap for China. They didn't have to grow their own supply base. The second one is that there are thousands of designers now employed by Chinese automakers. So if you go on the internet and you kind of look at Chinese cars, you'll see a transformation just the last few years. BYD alone has a design team of over 600 people led by a former Audi guy. So they're going global in terms of their design concepts, and then that knocks on to their engineering and their manufacturing quality. So the quality is there. That's what's scary about this. It isn't just like bottom feeding. They're coming in with $20,000 cars. They have cars at every price point, including up to, Range Rover fighters at $160,000. So you begin to think, like, as I hear myself talking, sometimes you go, oh, these guys are invincible? No, they must have some weaknesses. Where's the weakness? So a couple of things to keep an eye on. One is long-term reliability. We don't know yet. And the Chinese, if you ask Chinese friends of mine or Chinese people in particular, we love to take shortcuts. One of the reasons why they're quicker than everyone else is the Chinese deep in there, like, we can do this quicker and shorter than everyone else and maybe take some shortcuts. So that might come out later, that there's some things that we don't see at first blush. But otherwise, no, the quality of the Chinese vehicles are really quite strong.
Really, really good. So,
yeah.
And so you took a group of auto group folk, dealer folk to do this. Was that in the States, or did you actually take them to China to do that?
Both.
Yes. So before I forget, can I come next time? Can I come? My wife and I have been talking about going to like Turks and Caicos or Mexico or Jamaica to go test drive a BYD or a
Let's
Cherry.
go to Mexico City.
Yeah, let's go to
Yeah.
Mexico City. But it raises another good question, and that's one of the weird things that, a lot of the very digital first organizations like your Googles and your Facebooks and the like have talked about, or have stamped their feet about when it comes to automotive, is like the end of the dealership, that like OEMs are going consumer direct, and that's just not really happening. Like, that's not a real thing. And there's a bunch of reasons why. But what what is the sales model for Chinese OEMs? Are they comfortable with the franchise sales model of enlisting dealers like the ones you took for those test drives, or are they thinking more along the lines of building a Tesla-like model, or, to repeat a word we've used a lot today, or is it some hybrid of the two? Is
Mm.
it some combination of the two?
It seems like among the Chinese automakers today, the ones that are known out there, only one is still insisting that they want to go direct today, and that's Neo. They have these things called Neo houses. They've really committed heavily to the concept. Virtually everyone else going traditional franchise dealer model, including BYD. So that's good news for dealers, at least in the short term. Now, the thing to keep in mind is the Chinese like the dealer franchise model into Europe and the United States. Why? Mainly because it will give them allies in quote unquote hostile territory. So if they can enlist enough dealers, go to work for them, go to bat for them politically, they have allies on the ground. They become, these guys are great. They're welcome. However, keep an eye on the Chinese. They probably longer term would seek to go direct. Once they've established a market presence and the brand, then they would, if there's like BYD is arguably the most vertically integrated car maker in the world. They even own their own boats and there's ships that ship their cars around the world. You could see by extension, they'd want to control distribution and sales too. So step one, dealer model. Step two, look for them to go use the internet to go direct sales.
So it's not, I mean, that's a short term. When it depends what is short term, I guess, in that event.
I think 5 years is probably like I hear the Chinese are going to the dealers and saying, let's start with a 5-year agreement. And something I have enormous respect for Chinese people's tenacity when it comes to business, and they have a plan. So anytime they put a number out there or something, it isn't out of nowhere. That why not 3 years? Why not 5 years? They've thought about something. So keep that in the back of your mind. When the Chinese come to the table to negotiate, they didn't just show up and they're winging it. No, they have a specific plan in mind, and we would do ourselves a favor by being equally prepared as we go to talk to them.
Now, I know. So do you have any advice then for leadership at auto groups, dealers who, may vary somewhere, maybe on a scale between oblivious to electric vehicles to overwhelmed by the idea of working with an entirely new set of Chinese OEMs? What do you tell them? What will you tell them at the MVRO preview? What's the preview for the automotive conference and expo in October?
So I think that the picture to keep in mind is the Chinese ultimate goal, automakers' ultimate goal, is to enter the North American market because it remains the most lucrative on the planet. So at home, they're in a price war. Their own margins are going to zero. They need to survive. How do they survive? Go global, in particular, go global where they can make profits. So they're like at the gates trying to find a way in. Export, that door is shut. Okay, maybe we'll do transplant. So that's the Chinese perspective. They want to come in. Eventually, they probably will find a way in. For dealers in Canada, I think you can see the upside and the downside. So the downside is, what does it do to your other brands if you sign up with the Chinese? Will they be unhappy, or will they put those other brands out of business? There's a risk there. The upside is the Chinese could arguably come in with very good products at low prices, and that's terrific for any dealer. It's like, yes, where's the next Toyota? Bring it. Hyundai. Yeah, there must be a few of them over there in China. So that gets them excited. I think the thing to keep in mind is that the Chinese are extremely tough business people. And years of starting my own companies and running my own companies there's no finish line from the day you start negotiating with them to the day you have a contract, to the day you deliver services, to getting paid. Getting paid is hard. You're in China. You did the work. Here's the contract. We agree. Yeah, that's the contract. When are you going to get paid me? Yes. No, when? I need a date. Oh, it's out eventually. And that's really stressful. So to the extent you can work in terms where you're getting money earlier, do it. Don't be lulled into a sense of complacency and go, oh, these are the new guys on the block. They need me and they'll be easy. No, they're tough. They're tough. Brace yourself.
Brace yourself. Prepare. Yeah. That's good advice. Get the money early. I mean, that's good advice for anyone. Get the money early.
But you know what, Rowdy, what I think I would love to go a little bit deeper here, because having lived in China, coming back to the United States, so much in North America is taken for granted, like getting paid.
Right.
Like I'll do business and not even have a contract. You just have verbal. It's a grind in China to get the contract, to get it signed, to get it approved by the party, and then all these other layers of bureaucracy, and then you deliver the services, and you really have to fight hard to get paid. And they're not saying, oh, I'm sorry I'm late with this. So it's a different universe. And if the Chinese have their way, they'd say, this is how we do business in China. Why don't we do it globally like this? Yeah.
Right. They're not just exporting cars, they're exporting business models. So
potentially.
Yeah. You had a headline a little while ago, a few weeks back, and it caused my wife and I to have a conversation because she didn't believe me. Like she didn't initially agree. I thought it was delightfully controversial. What happens when all vehicles are made in China, or what happens if all vehicles are made in China? And she thought that was preposterous. She was like, that can't possibly happen. How would that happen? And I just held up my cell phone and I was like, I think all of these are made there. Like, I think your phone, my phone, you might have an iPhone. I might be rocking a Pixel. I think that if not made there, there's certainly some, 50, 60, 80% of components probably came from there. The chip's still probably somewhere else, but different story. What does that look like? Were you just being controversial? Delightfully controversial. I love it. Or do you think that is a plausible reality? What were you getting at when you said that?
I had the same kind of moment that you just described as I was writing that. It was sort of like, what if, what? Oh my god. Yeah, this could happen. And the way I framed it was, imagine an alien comes down to Earth tomorrow and says she wants to create the world's best car company. She's wondering where should she put her manufacturing center. And when you look at the advantages that China offers, it's like so obvious. There's only one place to manufacture your car. That's China. It has the scale, supply chains, the speed, the subsidies, the technology is there too. Its cost base is 25%, 30% lower than everyone. The quality is there. My goodness, why wouldn't she and everyone else manufacture? And then you start to think about it some more. And you look and you go, not only are the Chinese automakers building cars there now, but increasingly global automakers are building in China for export to markets worldwide. It's already happening. GM shipping cars from China to Mexico, Ford into Southeast Asia, Volkswagen back to Europe. The Teslas you have in Canada are built in China. So not only is it like theoretically possible, but in the absence of tariffs, it looks like every global automaker would, they're doing their financials and they go, obviously we should make all our cars in China. Now, the only bulwark against that or resistance to that, of course, is we want to protect our own jobs at home. And so in absence of tariffs and in absence of like some accelerated efforts in the West to really get competitive, you could make the argument like, yeah, China could easily and happily, because that's the new playbook out of China. They want to export to the world to sustain their economy across so many industries, shipbuilding and steel and solar panels, you name it. China is doubling down on manufacturing for export. So you go through the scenarios and you say the only thing stopping this would be tariffs or other legislation to say, no, we don't want to just have every car built in China.
Right.
That's when you spell it out, you go, that's kind of scary.
It is.
That is terrifying.
It is kind of scary. It is kind of scary. I mean, as you point out, there are lots of precedent. Like we have lots of other things. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier this week where I literally just picked up things on my desk and went, this mouse made in China. Like these headphones, well, okay, maybe they're made in Vietnam, but it's sort of this,
by a Chinese company that went there in order to avoid tariffs into Canada.
right? Like it's already happened in so many other consumer products. And if you start to conceive, which I think is still very hard for a lot of my dealer friends and OEM friends to really wrap their head around, if you start to think of the vehicle as a smartphone on wheels, like when it is more software, more compute and more battery and electric, the difference between the vehicle on the road and the cell phone in my hand, not so different anymore.
Not so different.
No,
you're exactly right. I was in a conversation with the really smart guy just this week. His name is Jorge Guajardo. He's the former ambassador to China from Mexico. And he made an interesting observation that he was in Mexico City recently. He and his son visited a BYD showroom, and his son said, gosh, this thing is so impressive. Let's get one and bring it back to DC where he now lives. And he goes, for the first time in my life, I realized that one would always go to North America for the very latest products, the very best. And when you were in Mexico or in Thailand, you'd either pay a huge premium or you just couldn't get the product. And he said, for the first time, as an eye opener, like a moment, oh, wow, proof. There seems to be proof that there's better products outside than we make at home. And that should be a massive wake-up call to industry. That the issue is that we are, after living in Asia, I lived in Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and China. Coming back to North America, things are very comfortable here. So how do we get urgency when look around, the Chinese themselves go, you live in a garden in America. Everything's so beautiful. Where's the urgency to meet this new challenge coming out, a massive new challenge coming out of China? How do we do that? That's going to be our secret superpower to find. Yeah.
I mean, it is such a good point. I think, so I did a presentation last year for a group of dealers out in truck country, out in Alberta. Mm-hmm. And I used a phrase you used earlier. I used the whether we like it or not. I was like, whether we like it or not, and whether that's in the near term or takes a little bit longer, we're going electric. And I said there are a few fundamental reasons for that. And I'm not even leaning, and I was very clear, I'm not leaning in on, we got to do it for climate change. I'm not doing the tree hugger argument.
Agreed.
But the two arguments I did give were, I said to them, even you do not want to pay more for gas. And whether you like it or not, the price of gas has never gone down in history. And I showed a graph. I had the price of gas at gas stations over the last 30 years in Canada. I'm like, as you can see, I was like, and I even make jokes, because I make a joke about the people who use the phrase, as you can clearly see by this slide, which usually means it's not clear. But I'm like, this one is pretty clear. Like you can clearly see by this slide, the gas has never gotten cheaper. It keeps on getting more expensive. And I said,
and you see it going down anywhere? No. You see this thing go?
Yeah. No. So as it gets more expensive, there will be a break point when we reach peak oil, which the analysts say is sometime in the next 5 years that the supply will cause the price of that to go up because the oil companies don't want to lose their profits. There's a bunch of other economics because, hashtag cartel. They could adjust it in a way that it isn't so impactful, but it means that they're going to have to swallow some of that themselves. And I don't think the oil companies have a long history of being generous with their profits. So yeah, so I've said at some point, you're not going to want to pay for this gasoline. You're going to want to pay for something cheaper. And what's cheaper is either just buying less of this,
Yes.
which is a plug-in hybrid, or not buying it at all, which is, going fully electric. The other argument I've lobbed at people is exactly as you just described, is the technology argument. I'm like, if we think about the insanity that people have around getting the latest iPhone or the latest Samsung for the Android folk or the latest Pixel. I mean, the intensity that consumers feel around having the latest and an awareness at some point in North America in the collective zeitgeist of, oh shit, the latest best fill in blank vehicle period, vehicle experience, capability, software, as this becomes more of a software based product, is not here. It's not here. It's not here right now. And it doesn't look like our local OEM friends are addressing that problem at the speed at which it will become a problem for them. Like they're not addressing it with the speed that would actually cause someone to go, well, actually, that Ford Maverick or that Ford Ranger, maybe it is nicer than that BYD Shark. Shark's still a stupid name, but still, great looking vehicle. They may need to change the name before they bring it across the United States. But
they ran out of they have the seal, they have the seagull. They're
really leaning into that marine theme, right? Like they're really leaning into the marine theme. This has been wonderful. Thank you for the conversation. I look forward to meeting you in person in Niagara Falls in just a few weeks. So let's try and let's find a time. And I don't know if you drink beer, if you like beer, but let's find a pint or drink a coffee. I'd love to chat with you in person. And
that will happen just days before the election here. So
it's going to be an interesting time.
An opportunity to make some wild predictions.
Ooh,
and then get out of town before we have to be accountable for that.
I like that. I like that a lot. That'll be interesting. I was in 2016 on the eve of the election. I was at a Honda national dealer event in Calgary, and Trump was elected, and all of the Honda people had to rewrite their scripts kind of overnight because they had to address the fact that there had been this seismic change in global, politics that they hadn't accounted for when they were originally scripting them. So.
Everybody was scrambling.
Yeah.
One final point, we come back to Canada just for a moment. My understanding, having spent a lot of time in Canada in recent months, is that prices is still a huge deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Getting that product in there that's at the right price could be phenomenal. And
it's a huge risk.
Yeah.
Or opportunity, depending on how you're looking at it. That the average price of a new car since pre-COVID has gone up over 10 grand, 10, 15 grand per vehicle. And it's created a really strange, I kind of like to call this out, like a strange situation, especially related to EVs, where, assuming you had $65,000 to spend, if you had $65,000 you wanted to spend on a new vehicle or commit to that, you could either get yourself an Ioniq 5 or 6, like you can get yourself into a nice new electric Hyundai, or you could be driving a BMW X3. Like there's this weird concentric circle overlap between the price of electric vehicles in Canada based on how they've gone up and the price of luxury and near luxury vehicles that would be much more capable vehicles in a way. Like, so it makes it a strange cost equation. And at the end of the day, for, lower income families, there just isn't an option. Like there are only so many Mitsubishi RVRs to go around, and a lot of the other low cost vehicles are being pulled out of market. So there's you're your entry point is probably around 40 grand, right? And
40.
yeah. So they get, obviously the OEMs list them at
Yeah.
38,000 Canadian. But when you actually get to the dealership and you actually try to buy that vehicle,
40 plus. Yeah.
40 plus.
And the
Yeah.
Chinese are telling me, they're some of them, this is in China, but the Seagull starts at 11,000. Their cost basis for many models in China. Oh, here's an interesting statistic. China's the biggest car market in the world. About 24 million light vehicles sold this year to sell this year. Half of those are priced under $21,000.
Holy shit.
So they have the wherewithal to deliver at very low cost. And so as a consumer, of course, that looks irresistible. What's the cost to us as a nation?
Right. Yeah.
That's what we're looking at.
Right. The larger opportunity cost is,
Yeah.
geopolitically and jobs and so much. And I think that that's the other strange thing about automotive that the average consumer does not understand is how far reaching an industry it is. Like the number of jobs, the dependency that, stems all the way from the person working at the gas station to the marketing coordinator that's building, Google and Facebook ads to the person who's like putting oil into tanks somewhere. Like the size and scale and the implication of turning electric, and then the size and scale of the implication of turning to having all vehicles made in China, devastating to global economy and effectively
could be devastating. The other thing to note, say it out loud, Japan and Korea, allies.
right.
China, not our ally. China,
Right.
not our ally. So what are their ambitions? What are their long-term ambitions?
Well, isn't one of those ambitions, and I was going to bring it up earlier, but it's just a smidge off topic for us, is that in parallel with their desire to get in deep into automotive manufacturing and then focus on manufacturing their own domestic brands, fostering their own domestic brands, it's also energy independence, right? It's also energy sovereignty in that they don't have much in the way of oil reserves, and that pretty much every barrel of oil that goes into China comes in on a ship right
You're
now.
absolutely right. That was the number one driver to electrics, is they became the number one importer of oil, surpassing the United States around 2010. And that made them really nervous. They said, we don't want to get into those Middle East quagmires. How do we shift away? So,
And that's a
mm-hmm.
and that's a very salient, very complicated conversation to have with my friends in Alberta, right? Because it's the heart of the oil sands in Canada. And, we just, where are we? We're September. So how many months? May, June, July, August, September, 4 months ago, fired up our new state-owned, Canadian government-owned Trans Mountain pipeline and tripled output through those lines to effectively be able to sell to China for now, while they still need it. And that might change very dramatically in 5 or 10 years, and they're not going to need it. So for all the folk who may not want to be driving or shifting to electric vehicles, I'm like, there are reasons why that would be good for the Canadian economy as well, right? And Canada also sitting on a shit ton of, that's an official term, that's a measurement term, shit ton of lithium, right? We've got a lot of the rare earth minerals here. We just haven't scraped them out of the ground.
Absolutely. That's why they call the show The Change Optimist.
Well, and so you mentioned that earlier, and one of the things I have said in a lot of the presentations when I was at Google, it came up over and over again. I have the same damn slide that I still use today. It's an image you can just find. You can Google it. You can find it. That just with a neon sign that says change, that optimism is a choice, right? That, no matter how dire, no matter how much things may not be going your way, and no matter how much this global shift is currently leaning very heavily to China and Southeast Asia, that, optimism is a choice, and that we can either weather this transition. It's called a transition for a reason, with
Mm-hmm.
a cloud over our head and be miserable about it. Or we can address it with optimism and find the ways to weather it better, right? To weather it in a way where, Canada, the US, Mexico still come out on top. And I think there's still lots of opportunity for that to happen, in my opinion.
100%. We have the wherewithal, we have the resource, we have the people. I think we just have to have that mindset. The mindset. Yeah.
The drive, right?
Yes.
So yeah. Awesome. So thank you very much for the time. This has been wonderful. I'll see you in Niagara Falls.
See you in Niagara. In the meantime, at any time, if you want access, go to www.dunneinsights.com for the podcast, for the newsletter. It's all there. And enjoy.
Awesome. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It's been great. I loved that conversation with Michael Dunne. Both names, all one word. I did edit out a big chunk because at one point, and it kind of came across weird, I asked him how he keeps his head shaved so cleanly, right? Like, for us follically challenged people. But I deleted that part of the interview. As always, thank you for listening. If you are listening to this on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, all of the places where the music is, please hit subscribe or like or follow or whatever that fucking button says. And also, don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter. You can find that now at thechangeoptimist.com. It's still available at growdy.com. It still redirects, but kind of migrated and merged the podcast and the newsletter together. So you can find that at thechangeoptimist.com. As always, thanks again to Dark Tapes for my music. That's the show. Thanks for listening.